when it comes to Stephanie Hsu's first major starring role, it, it it's a bit rough, and honestly, it may struggle to win over new fans and could potentially test fans who are waiting for her to finally have her moment where she is the star and not one of the notable people part of an ensemble cast. So to summarize the first season, Ruby's at 33 years of age, and she's definitely in a mindset where she wants to settle down, find a good man, potentially have kids. But the problem for her is that she keeps dating people, sometimes having sex with them, and it's just not what she's looking for. Things don't click. And unfortunately for her, she recently has found out that one of her exes have died. And on top of that, she and her roommate slash best friend AJ find out that pretty much every man she has dated or had sex with, they're dying one by one. And I should include, it's also the handful of women she has had sex with or have dated. And with that, she and AJ spend most of the season trying to track down these people and warn them, alongside trying to figure out a way to solve this curse, while dealing with a bunch of things that Ruby unfortunately brings upon herself. So again, to the review portion. The main highlight, and perhaps only highlight when it comes to this show, is that occasionally there are conversations, if not monologues, that feel real and necessary compared to everything else this show gives you. For when it comes to Ruby, there's this sense that she's supposed to be fun, flirty, open to love, but bad at committing to anyone that doesn't seem like it could be her forever person. But what was shown throughout the season, which we'll go more into in the low point, is somebody who's very much immature, doesn't seemingly understand reciprocity, and I feel is probably more willing to give her body to someone than her actual feelings. And in some ways, through AJ, definitely relies on someone enabling their bad behavior to function. So when it comes to these few confessions from one or two of the guys that like her, a conversation she has with AJ's boyfriend Zach is his name, Zach. He gives one of those rare moments where this show seemingly wants to have some type of heart, some type of realism, and granted, not every show needs to have some realism in it, but when you take what Ruby says compared to how she acts and the discrepancy, then what this show tries to do, there's a lot of things that conflict and don't create a beautiful combustion, but instead kind of fall flat. And in those few silver lining moments, you see that there is potential for something better, but for whatever reason, it just never became something that this show pursued consistently, which leads to the low points, which I believe, yes, there's actually on the fence, but there's two low points. The first low point is that this show speaks for the exes, and it kind of annoys the hell out of me because in my mind, you would think sort of like how HBO Max has Love Life, which had Anna Kendrick for the first season, and it kind of went through her exes and why they got together, what led to the love, and what happened with the breakup. You would think with Ruby having about 20 or so people who are exes, instead of rushing through all of them in one season, they would kind of break it down so you get a sense of who Ruby is beyond this selfish, semi-young person. But unfortunately, even when it comes to actors who are famous and have like notable names, they don't really get to give you much. Even when it comes to a throuple that somehow Ruby got part of, they don't really go into how she got into that or how that experimenting as being a third within somebody's marriage. All the interesting ways they could have explored how she got into this relationship, especially because from what it seems, Ruby does not have a type. She will go with a black man, white man, someone who's skinny, someone who's heavy set. One guy was even, the way she painted him, obese. But we don't really get to understand how and why she got with these people. We don't get to fully understand, besides each one calling her selfish, almost with the exact same dialogue, why they broke up. And it just really feels like it stifles her as a character and even stifles the story, because it makes these people who go one after another like they're nothing just lack any real value. I mean, one exception would be Alexandra Shipp plays one of Ruby's exes who gets to actually talk about their relationship and really break down what the problems were, but outside of her, pretty much everybody comes and goes like fodder to a horror movie villain, which leads to the next low point, and that's just Ruby's lack of growth. In my mind, the Ruby we meet in episode 1 shouldn't be the same Ruby that we know in episode 8. There should be some type of change, especially because, despite it not seeming so, this show takes place over a couple of months. And you would think between seeing people that she once loved or had sex with die, and then everything that goes on between her and AJ, and then this relationship that's developing between her and somebody else, you would think this would do something to her. You think this would make her less selfish. You think it would make her take more note of how she treated people. But in my mind, the only thing that changed from episode 1, episode 8 is the fact that Ruby, I'm struggling to think of anything that changed. And what makes it worse for me is that by episode 8, you see her get rewarded with certain things. And it's like, when did she earn this? What has she done to actually get somebody who seems like he could be a really good boyfriend, potential husband, if not father to her children? What has she specifically done? What has she gone through? Because even when it comes to all of these exes dying one after another, she is more so of the mindset of potentially after becoming celibate or not being able to have sex with this man she likes, more than it is mourning or even thinking about how she has effectively killed 20 people who have friends, families, maybe had relationships what they were moving on from, but none of that matters to her. And it just makes it so she's such an easy character to dislike, if not hate, and not in a love to hate way like Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones, but just the type of character who doesn't even have something you can see as redeemable, or even like, I remember someone said once about Viola Davis's character on How to Get Away with Murder, how it wasn't a likable character, and the argument was she doesn't need to be a likable character. But I would say to compensate with that, you saw that she was a formidable character. She was very good at her job, messy as all hell of her life, but there was something there that made you say that she may not be likable, but that's because in her line of work, what she does, there's not a necessary need to be likable. With what Ruby does, she's a party planner. She's a honestly terrible best friend. And with that, you're just like, there's no means of finding a way to justify the way she acts beyond the crutch of her mother dying when she was 18 and then her dad abandoning her at the same time. And while I get that is very traumatic for someone, especially at 18, at the same time, it's like you can't use that as the ghostly excuse for everything that she does. So, getting to the on-offense topic, it's the issue that, at least I had, where you may not feel like you really get to know these characters. But when it comes to Lee, you get a lot of tidbits about people, but in terms of really getting to know them so that you can say that this decision led to that decision, I wouldn't say that necessarily is apt. For, as just noted, Ruby's abandonment issues seemingly are made to try to justify who she is. But what isn't talked about is what led to her choosing her life for being a party planner, what led to her and AJ becoming best friends. And I would even add in, considering the death of her mom and also the absence of her father was such a major thing, there's also a question of how was her mother and father's relationship before her mother died, since you would think that would set the tone for how she would be in a relationship. But that's not gone into. And then when it comes to AJ, there's a question of what is her relationship with her parents like, considering who she's dating. And then there's also the question of she has an apartment in Seattle. Her only roommate seems to be, in terms of a paying roommate, we're assuming is Ruby, and yet we only see her work a bartender job maybe once or twice throughout the whole season, and yet she can afford to be the person who has the least. Her credit is good enough to handle that, and it's kind of perplexing, but at the same time, it's one of those things where you can tell that with this show, the idea seemingly is this whole thing with Ruby's ex is dying should be a big enough focus so that when it comes to all these details about characters, it's not something that needs to be important. But in my mind, you can't just slack off on character development just because you have this central conflict, which granted is interesting, but because they don't fully take advantage of how it could be really interesting in terms of seeing Ruby and how she interacted with these different people, how that relationship developed and how it fell apart. Because it doesn't do that, which would have been character development for at least Ruby, maybe AJ as a side effect, it makes it so you have to develop these other characters more. Because it doesn't do that, it just relies on the central conflict that is lukewarm at best. It makes it so you have to look for other things and other people in order to really keep you hooked in. And as noted thus far, Ruby is not a likable character, and she doesn't compensate that with being like the greatest person at her job or something like that. AJ, while she does have an Amanda Knox obsession, she doesn't really give any type of main character energy, so can't really latch onto her. And then when it comes to the men in here, they're just made to be attractive and potential love interests for Ruby, or else they're AJ's boyfriend who you don't fully understand the connection or the relationship, besides it potentially being one of those cases where he approached her, she was flattered, and she just went with it. But overall, when it comes to Laid, it's one of those shows that I feel, unfortunately, believe that it can get multiple seasons, so it can just treat the first season as just a foundation, while in successive seasons it can build up into something better. But in my mind, even with noting the cliffhanger that introduced a character who was probably long overdue for us to see, this is one of those shows that had too much of an ego thinking that it can get a second season, and then with that it just didn't do what needed to be done for the first season to justify getting renewed. But who knows? Even though I haven't seen anything about this being a rated smash for Peacock or anything like that, maybe this has done better than I would assume it would have, and we could get a second season that will show what this program could do rather than what it has done, which is be a rather mediocre production.